The digital heartbeat of the house simply ceased to exist in the early morning hours, triggering a single physical alarm, leaving behind only a void of digital data. The footage was brief, but the details it captured were chillingly precise and immediately elevated the threat level of the entire case. The recorded individual was a male suspect whose height was officially estimated by federal agents to be between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches. He moved with a deliberate and calculated stride that suggested he was highly familiar with the terrain and completely aware of his objective. The analysis of the stride and posture captured in those few frames of video indicated a level of physical fitness that allowed for rapid movement while carrying a potential load. His identity was thoroughly concealed behind a mask, ensuring that facial recognition software would be entirely useless in tracking him down. Furthermore, the visual evidence clearly showed that the suspect was armed with a firearm securely tucked into his waistband. The placement of the firearm at his waist showed a readiness for immediate deployment if his path was obstructed. This detail transformed the investigation from a baffling disappearance into an active and highly dangerous pursuit of an armed individual. The presence of the weapon suggested that the perpetrator was fully prepared to use lethal force to accomplish his goals and secure his escape. This is the central question surrounding the sudden and inexplicable disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Every single frame of that footage was scrutinized by behavioral experts attempting to build a psychological profile of the masked man. However, amidst the dark clothing and the concealed features, there was one glaring and highly specific detail that stood out to the forensic analysts. The masked suspect was wearing a very distinct style of backpack firmly strapped to his shoulders as he navigated the shadows. Through rigorous image enhancement and pattern matching, investigators were able to positively identify the exact make and model of the bag. It was a Ozark Trail hiker backpack. This was not a generic or untraceable piece of tactical gear purchased through underground channels. The Ozark Trail brand is a highly specific product line that is distributed and sold exclusively through Walmart retail locations. This critical piece of verified information provided the first tangible thread that could potentially lead back to the identity of the phantom suspect. The backpack was a massive operational error on the part of an otherwise meticulous intruder. He had carefully neutralized the home network and successfully concealed his face from the cameras. He had navigated the neighborhood without triggering any secondary alarms. The early morning hours of February 1st, 2026 brought a terrifying realization that the walls meant to protect her had been seamlessly bypassed, yet he walked away from the crime scene carrying a commercially exclusive product that immediately narrowed the focus of the massive federal investigation. Was the backpack a desperate last-minute addition to carry specialized tools, or was it specifically chosen to blend in with civilian populations during an escape? The deliberate destruction of the digital perimeter proved he understood modern surveillance architecture on an advanced level. Yet the exclusive retail item strapped to his back provided investigators with a massive database of transaction records to exploit. He essentially traded his visual anonymity for a highly traceable commercial footprint. The suspect meticulously ensured he would not be recognized by his face or his digital shadow, but he completely failed to account for the unique retail signature of his equipment. Before we dive into how the authorities utilize this critical piece of commercial evidence to track the suspect, I want you to drop your theories in the comments below. What kind of perpetrator plans a flawless digital blackout but carries a mass market backpack exclusively sold at a single national retailer? The absence of noise is what makes this case so deeply disturbing. Rumors fade, but digital footprints do not. This glaring contradiction between high-level technical sabotage and careless physical equipment is the most baffling aspect of the visual evidence. The intruder managed to completely erase an 84-year-old woman from her secure digital grid without leaving a trace of his own identity. But as he disappeared into the night, he was carrying a giant invisible billboard on his back, directly pointing to a specific retail supply chain. The confirmation of the suspect's physical description and his armament sent an immediate shockwave through the public and the victim's family. The abstract fear of a missing loved one was suddenly replaced by the terrifying reality of an armed and masked abductor caught on tape. In the wake of this devastating revelation, Savannah Guthrie stepped forward to make a public and deeply emotional appeal. Leveraging her platform as a national television anchor, she directly addressed the perpetrators and desperately called for any verified proof of life. Her plea was a stark reminder of the human cost at the center of this highly technical forensic puzzle. The family needed a sign that Nancy was still alive and surviving the ordeal, but the silence from the captors remained absolute. While the family navigated their agonizing public nightmare, the investigative machinery quietly shifted its focus toward the massive commercial footprint left by the suspect. To look past the speculation and examine the raw facts, make sure you are subscribed to the Ellis Evidence Room. The identification of the Ozark Trail Hiker backpack transformed the case from a local neighborhood search into a sprawling, data-driven manhunt. Investigators immediately partnered with the corporate security divisions of Walmart to access their vast national retail databases. The strategy was theoretically sound and entirely grounded in modern forensic accounting. The authorities sought to filter thousands of purchase records looking for cash or credit transactions involving that specific model of backpack. They cross-referenced the purchase dates with geographical proximity to the crime scene and searched for any corresponding purchases of masks or dark clothing. The digital dragnet was designed to catch the suspect in the mundane act of buying his operational gear before the crime was ever committed. Teams of analysts worked around the clock, filtering through gigabytes of point-of-sale data from countless retail locations. They pulled security footage from store aisles, attempting to match the height and build of the suspect to any individuals purchasing the backpack. It was a painstaking and exhausting process of elimination that relied heavily on corporate cooperation and advanced data sorting algorithms. The process of cross-referencing the retail data with known cellular tower pings proved to be equally maddening. We do not deal in internet gossip or baseless theories. The suspect had already demonstrated a high level of technical sophistication by disabling the home network, so it was entirely possible he had also practiced severe operational security regarding his own mobile devices. If he left his personal phone at home while purchasing the backpack at a retail location, the location data would be completely useless to the forensic accountants. The analysts had to consider the terrifying possibility that the backpack was acquired months or even years in advance specifically for this operation, or perhaps purchased through a secondary cash market like a garage sale where no digital receipt is ever generated. Every plausible scenario only added layers of complexity to an already convoluted digital investigation. The investigators were betting that the perpetrator's one careless consumer choice would ultimately be his undoing. However, the sheer volume of commercial data quickly became an overwhelming obstacle for the local authorities. The Ozark Trail brand is incredibly popular, and the specific hiker model had been sold to thousands of perfectly innocent customers across the country. The trail of receipts was vast and largely disconnected from any known criminal networks or previous offenders. We rely entirely on forensic timelines and verified data to reconstruct the sequence of events. Days turned into weeks as the retail data analysis slowly ground to a frustrating halt without yielding a definitive primary suspect. The massive dragnet was capturing too much noise and not enough actionable intelligence to move the investigation forward. The local precinct simply did not have the computational power or the specialized manpower to indefinitely sustain such a massive analytical operation without a solid return on investment. The momentum of the first 2 weeks was rapidly fading into the grim reality of a cold case. The local police department was expending enormous resources on a commercial data trail that seemed to be leading into a dead end. The entire investigation was dangerously close to stalling completely out as the commercial leads dried up and the digital footprint remained non-existent. The realization that the retail strategy was failing placed immense pressure on the command structure. The quiet frustration inside the command center was palpable as the days without a proof of life ticked by relentlessly. The authorities needed a physical breakthrough that could bypass the endless rows of retail data and point directly to the biology of the suspect. When a person vanishes into thin air, the answers are rarely found in loud, dramatic confrontations. That critical breakthrough finally materialized completely by chance in the middle of February. A startling physical discovery was made on a desolate stretch of road exactly 2 miles away from the initial crime scene. The physical discovery arrived at the exact moment the digital strategy was collapsing. It shifted the entire paradigm from looking for what the suspect bought to looking for exactly who the suspect was on a cellular level. The exhaustive search of the retail supply chain had hit a massive data bottleneck that threatened to freeze the entire case. But a single piece of discarded fabric found resting in the dirt just miles from the disabled digital fortress was about to violently alter the trajectory of the hunt. This single item would force the local authorities to immediately transfer the most critical aspects of the case over to a specialized federal laboratory. The hunt for a retail receipt was over, and the complex search for a biological blueprint was about to begin. While federal agents were trying to untangle the retail supply chain, a secondary crisis began to unfold that severely derailed the entire investigation. They are hidden in the quiet fractions of a second when a network connection drops. The vacuum of information surrounding the disappearance created a perfect breeding ground for opportunistic predators. When a high-profile individual vanishes without a trace, the silence is inevitably filled by individuals looking to exploit the tragedy for financial gain. This is exactly what happened when a man named Derek Colella allegedly inserted himself into the narrative. According to official reports, he is accused of sending fraudulent extortion letters to the grieving relatives. He cruelly demanded a massive payout in Bitcoin in exchange for the safe return of the missing woman. These alleged messages were meticulously crafted to sound authentic, and they forced the authorities to divert massive amounts of manpower and technical resources away from the primary search. Cybercrime units had to carefully trace the cryptocurrency wallets and analyze the digital origins of the threatening communications. Every single hour spent verifying these cruel hoaxes was an hour stolen from the actual pursuit of the real perpetrator. The introduction of financial extortion completely shifted the working theories of the command center. They are buried in the exact moment a camera lens stops recording. Investigators had to seriously consider if this was a highly sophisticated kidnapping for ransom operation rather than a targeted assault. The alleged actions of Derek Colella did not just cause immense emotional distress for the family, but they actively polluted the intelligence stream. They flooded the tip lines with static and forced detectives to chase digital ghosts across state lines. But the malicious interference from outside actors was only a fraction of the chaos paralyzing the search efforts. A massive internal crisis was simultaneously tearing through the highest levels of the local law enforcement agency tasked with solving the crime. Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County was the primary authority figure overseeing the initial response and the crucial early hours of the manhunt. At the exact moment when the public desperately needed a steady and reliable leader, the sheriff became embroiled in a devastating political and legal scandal. He faced severe allegations of perjury relating to his past disciplinary records from his tenure in El Paso. The accusations suggested a pattern of deceit and a profound lack of integrity at the very top of the command structure. This revelation completely shattered the fragile trust between the community and the investigating agency. There was no shattered glass and no tripped alarm to signal that a perimeter had been breached. The silence of that digital footprint is deafening. Citizens became highly skeptical of the official press briefings, and the community tip lines began to dry up. When the credibility of the lead investigator is fundamentally compromised, the entire foundation of the case begins to crumble. The local agency was suddenly fighting a desperate two-front war. They were trying to track down a ghost who could bypass advanced security networks while simultaneously battling a massive public relations nightmare within their own ranks. The internal investigations and the political maneuvering consumed the oxygen in the room. Crucial interagency communications broke down and the momentum of the search visibly stalled. Time is the absolute most critical factor in any abduction scenario, but it becomes infinitely more urgent when the victim requires specialized medical equipment to survive. A battery inside a medical implant does not care about political scandals or cryptocurrency tracing. It operates on a strict and unforgiving biological countdown. Every single moment wasted on fake ransom demands and internal police department politics was a moment pushing the victim closer to a critical medical failure. It tells a story of calculated precision rather than random violence. The structural integrity of the entire investigation was collapsing under the weight of human greed and institutional incompetence. The local authorities were fundamentally drowning in a sea of red herrings and political fallout. They were losing their grip on the narrative and failing to secure the perimeter. We need to cut through this kind of dangerous noise and focus on the undeniable facts. If you believe in holding investigations to the highest forensic standards and cutting out the misinformation, please like this video so the algorithm can push fact-based analysis to a wider audience. The truth is often buried underneath layers of institutional failure and opportunistic lies. The local police department had hit a brick wall of their own making, and they desperately needed a miracle to pull the case back from the brink of total collapse. That miracle was not going to come from a press conference or a digital trace. The person who approached that house did not come to ransack it or steal valuables. It was going to come from a microscopic piece of biological material left completely by accident. The failure of leadership at the county level meant that federal intervention was no longer just an option, but an absolute necessity. The FBI would have to step in and take over the reins to salvage what was left of the compromised evidence trail before it was permanently lost. The turning point of the entire investigation did not occur inside a high-tech surveillance center or a corporate boardroom. It happened on a quiet stretch of asphalt, exactly 2 miles from the violated digital fortress. As search and rescue grid teams meticulously combed the surrounding areas, expanding their radius inch by inch, they discovered a single piece of discarded fabric. It was a glove left abandoned on the side of the road. In the context of a highly orchestrated electronic intrusion, a dropped piece of winter clothing seemed almost too mundane to be significant. But in forensic science, the most ordinary objects often hold the most devastating secrets. The recovery of the fabric was handled with extreme precision. They came with a specific objective that required neutralizing the electronic eyes and ears of the property before making a single physical move. Crime scene technicians treated the immediate area as a secondary hot zone, carefully photographing the placement and trajectory of the item before securing it in a sterile evidence container. The material was immediately transported to a secure federal laboratory for an exhaustive biological workup. The hypothesis was straightforward, but incredibly high stakes. If the perpetrator wore the item during the physical altercation on the concrete porch, he almost certainly left behind microscopic skin cells or perspiration trapped inside the synthetic fibers. The laboratory technicians utilized advanced swabbing techniques to extract any potential trace material from the inner lining of the fabric. The painstaking process yielded a massive triumph for the evidence recovery team. They successfully isolated a clear and robust sample of foreign biological material. It was an intact and highly readable genetic profile that absolutely did not belong to the victim or any known family members. That level of technical awareness elevates this situation from a simple break-in to a highly orchestrated event. The phantom, who had flawlessly bypassed the electronic perimeter, had made a fatal human error. He had carelessly discarded the only thing connecting his physical body to the scene of the crime. The isolated sample was immediately uploaded into the combined DNA index system known as CODIS. The federal database contains millions of profiles from previously convicted offenders and violent criminals. Investigators anxiously awaited the automated ping that would instantly attach a name and a criminal history to their masked suspect. But the digital notification never arrived. The system returned a complete, and frustrating blank. The unknown suspect had absolutely no prior felony convictions and no established footprint in the National Criminal Registry. He was a complete ghost in the machine. This negative result presented a massive hurdle, but it also initiated the most advanced and fascinating phase of the modern investigative process. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately pivoted from traditional database matching to the cutting-edge realm of genetic genealogy. The investigation into this digital blackout reveals a timeline that is as precise as it is terrifying. This specialized discipline completely bypasses the criminal justice databases and instead utilizes commercial ancestry networks to build a sprawling biological family tree. The pristine sample extracted from the discarded roadside fabric was transformed into a complex digital file and cross-referenced against millions of voluntary public DNA submissions. The genetic genealogists are not looking for a direct match to the killer. They are looking for distant cousins or third-degree relatives who share a specific percentage of genetic markers. Once those distant familial connections are identified, the analysts begin the agonizingly slow process of building a family tree backward through time. They comb through census records, marriage certificates, and public obituaries to trace the bloodlines, down to a specific geographical area, and eventually to a single generation of brothers or cousins. The suspect truly believed that his mask and his deep understanding of network security had rendered him completely invisible to the authorities. He had orchestrated a flawless technological blackout, but he fundamentally misunderstood the permanence of his own biology. He left behind the ultimate unalterable barcode of his identity resting in the dirt. Every missing byte of data points to a suspect who understood the modern security landscape perfectly. The meticulous process of genetic genealogy takes time to yield a definitive name, but its accuracy is mathematically absolute. The invisible walls are closing in on the suspect, not through a hacked computer terminal, but through the undeniable genetic legacy of his own ancestors. To ensure you do not miss the massive update when the federal laboratory finally completes the family tree and reveals the suspect's identity, make sure you hit the notification bell right now. The race between the laboratory centrifuges and the silence of the missing woman is reaching a critical breaking point. The transition from a local jurisdiction struggling with internal scandals to a massive federal scientific endeavor completely changed the atmosphere of the hunt. The suspect is no longer running from a compromised sheriff, but from a relentless algorithm that maps out human ancestry with terrifying precision. Every new connection made on that digital family tree is a step closer to his front door. The biology cannot be erased or manipulated. As the federal genealogists painstakingly map out the branches of the suspect's family tree, the primary motive behind the brazen operation remains deeply shrouded in mystery. The sheer lack of stolen property presents the most baffling contradiction for the behavioral analysts working the file. The illusion of absolute security is a dangerous comfort when the architecture of that security can be severed with a single calculated motion. When investigators thoroughly processed the interior of the residence, they discovered that absolutely no items of significant monetary value had been removed. High-end electronics, jewelry, and sensitive financial documents were left completely untouched in their original locations. This glaring fact entirely eliminates the theory of a standard home invasion or a robbery gone wrong. Burglars do not spend hours neutralizing complex digital networks. simply to leave the valuables behind and walk out with an elderly resident. The complete absence of a financial motive is what makes the situation so incredibly chilling. It points toward a highly targeted and deeply personal objective that defies conventional criminal logic. The alleged extortion attempts were completely debunked as cruel opportunism, leaving the authorities with absolutely no genuine demands from the actual perpetrator. There have been no secret communications, no encrypted manifestos, and no secondary instructions delivered to the authorities or the panicked relatives. The silence from the captor is just as absolute as the silence of the severed network connection on that fateful Sunday morning. The most agonizing aspect of this ongoing investigation is the complete and total lack of any verified proof of life. Her absolute reliance on a web of electronic systems was the defining anomaly of her daily routine. Since the moment the biological trace was left on the concrete, there has been zero confirmation that the victim survived the initial extraction from the property. The brutal reality of her severe medical dependency cast a dark and heavy shadow over the entire timeline. The authorities officially classify this as a highly active and open investigation, but the window for a safe recovery is universally acknowledged to be incredibly narrow. The intricate genetic puzzle being assembled in the federal laboratory is the only viable path forward. The investigators are essentially waiting for a mathematical algorithm to point its finger at a specific address. The tension is palpable because everyone involved understands that the science of ancestry tracking is meticulous and slow-moving. It cannot be rushed or forced regardless of how desperately the clock is ticking. The case stands perfectly still, balanced on the edge of a microscopic breakthrough. The entire vast machinery of the justice system is currently paused, waiting for a single genetic connection to finally snap into place. The suspect is currently living in borrowed time, completely unaware of how close the ancestral map is getting to his true identity. Nancy was an elderly woman whose fragile health required constant and invisible supervision. He managed to commit what initially appeared to be a perfect crime by controlling the flow of digital information, but he failed to control the biological evidence. Until that final name is officially generated, the public is left grappling with the terrifying implications of a phantom who can turn off the lights and vanish into the night without a trace. The prolonged silence only deepens the psychological torment for those waiting for answers. Every passing day without an update from the federal task force amplifies the dread surrounding the true nature of the intrusion. Was this an act of calculated revenge orchestrated by someone hiding deep within the periphery of her past, or was it a chillingly random selection by an individual obsessed with testing his technical capabilities against a secured target? The lack of stolen goods suggests that the victim herself was the sole prize in this macabre operation. The sheer amount of planning required to bypass the specific medical tracking applications indicates a level of surveillance that is deeply disturbing. The perpetrator had to know her exact routines and understand the specific frequencies used by her devices. Instead, there was a chilling electronic silence that descended upon the residence. Her physical heart was monitored by the relentless digital pulse of an implantable pacemaker. This required weeks, if not months, of careful and patient observation. The active status of the file means that detectives are still running down every single lead, however insignificant it may seem. They are re-interviewing neighbors and combing through months of extended digital logs looking for any sign of a digital stalker. Yet, despite the massive allocation of federal resources and the intense media scrutiny, the ultimate fate of the woman remains locked away behind a wall of silence. The family tree continues to grow branch by branch inside the laboratory. The biological countdown has not stopped. What this case teaches us about the intersection of elder care and cyber-physical security is profoundly alarming. We have fundamentally blurred the line between physical safety and digital vulnerability. Modern medical implants and smart home infrastructures are no longer just passive conveniences designed to assist the elderly. They have evolved into the vital black boxes of modern forensic investigations. Much like the flight data recorders retrieved from aviation disasters, these interconnected devices hold the exact chronological history of a catastrophic event. This tiny device transmitted data continuously to ensure her survival and provide peace of mind to her family. They log every heartbeat, every door opening, and every network disruption with unbiased mathematical precision. The forensic timelines generated by these systems are completely redefining how we understand crime scenes. However, this intense reliance on the Internet of Things creates a terrifying new attack vector for sophisticated predators. The concept of a secure perimeter is completely meaningless if the underlying digital architecture is left exposed to exploitation. When we entrust the physical well-being of our most vulnerable populations to automated wireless networks, we inadvertently invite a new breed of technologically fluent criminals into their living rooms. The physical lock on the front door is completely obsolete if the medical tracking application monitoring the resident's pulse can be quietly severed from the outside. This investigation starkly illustrates that the traditional boundaries of a crime scene have permanently shifted. We must analyze the invisible data streams with the exact same rigor that we apply to examining physical trace evidence. The future of protective care requires a radical reassessment of how we secure these vital digital tethers against intentional, malicious disruption. She lived inside a modern fortress built not of heavy stone, but of interconnected sensors and devices. Failing to harden these communication protocols leaves an entire generation dangerously exposed to individuals who view our modern digital conveniences not as tools of preservation, but as easily manipulated weapons of silent isolation. The advanced genetic profile sits waiting in the federal database as the complex ancestral map slowly takes shape. The medical devices remain violently disconnected, and the profound silence of that Sunday morning continues to echo through the empty halls of the residence. The physical evidence points toward a sudden and terrifying extraction, while the disabled networks reveal a mind capable of cold and calculating technical sabotage. We are left staring at the terrifying void between what the digital logs failed to record and what the biological material is about to expose. When the sophisticated laboratory methods finally connect those stray fibers to a definitive name, will it reveal a completely random predator who simply saw an opportunity, or will it expose a deeply embedded threat who knew exactly when the invisible shields would fall? The answer is buried somewhere deep inside that sprawling family tree, waiting to be pulled into the harsh light of a federal courtroom. The intersection of missing data and microscopic clues creates a forensic puzzle that demands total objective scrutiny. These tools were carefully designed to keep the dangerous outside world at bay, while keeping medical professionals constantly informed of her status. Do not let the rumors distract you from the hard evidence. Until the timeline is complete, stay analytical. I will see you in the evidence room. She even attended her regular religious services exclusively through a computer screen. This digital attendance was a strict habit that formed the predictable and comforting rhythm of her otherwise quiet weekends. This deep and pervasive integration with technology was supposed to be her ultimate safety net against the vulnerabilities of old age. It was intended to guarantee that any sudden medical emergency or physical intrusion would instantly trigger a massive and immediate response from emergency services. On the evening of January 31st, the environment appeared completely undisturbed and perfectly normal. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her back to her residence following a quiet family dinner at his home. First, the doorbell camera monitoring the front entrance went entirely dark. He waited outside and watched her walk inside to secure the heavy front door at exactly 9:50 at night. The local police department later confirmed, through official statements, that the family is fully cooperating with the investigation and they are absolutely not considered suspects in any capacity. Tommaso was simply the last known person to see her safely enclosed within her digital sanctuary. The physical perimeter was fully secured, and the sophisticated monitoring applications were actively tracking her vital signs without interruption. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to suspect that this intricate safety net was about to be completely dismantled. The extreme reliance on these devices means that her heart rate and her internet protocol addresses serve as the most accurate forensic timestamps available to investigators. Without these electronic markers, the entire timeline of this baffling case would instantly collapse into pure speculation and guesswork. The digital network logs are the only truly objective witnesses to what transpired in the silent hours after the front door finally clicked shut. They provide a rigid and unforgiving chronological framework that cannot be manipulated by faulty human memories or the emotional trauma of a grieving family. It did not capture a struggle or a frantic escape, but there is a terrifying, inherent vulnerability in relying so heavily on technological security. For a frail individual, a locked door provides a tangible physical barrier, but an electronic monitoring system requires a continuous flow of power and a stable internet connection to function properly. When she went to sleep that Saturday night, she was fully protected by the invisible shield of her smart home environment. The vital data flowed steadily from her chest to the home router and out into the wider medical tracking network. It was a flawless and reassuring system right up until the exact moment it was abruptly terminated. At 9:50 at night, the doors were locked tight and Nancy was incredibly safe inside her modern digital fortress. But those electronic walls and invisible safety nets are only truly effective as long as the vital wires remain uncut and the electrical current continues to flow freely through the quiet house. The morning of February first arrived with an unsettling quiet that immediately signaled something was terribly wrong. Sunday mornings were usually defined by a strict and unwavering routine built around her online religious commitments. It was systematically and deliberately disabled by someone who knew exactly where its blind spots were. When the time came for her regular virtual mass, her screen remained entirely blank and her user profile never logged into the system. This absence was not a simple oversight or a minor technical glitch. For a woman whose entire schedule was dictated by predictability, this sudden deviation was a massive red flag that prompted immediate concern. The digital absence quickly translated into a physical reality when the first responders were called to check on her well-being. Approaching the residence, the exterior appeared deceptively calm under the morning light. The front door remained secured just as it had been the night before. But the illusion of safety evaporated the moment investigators moved toward the rear of the property. The back door was discovered wide open and exposed to the elements. It was a jarring sight that completely contradicted the careful lockdown procedures observed just hours prior. The open door was the first physical breach in a timeline that had previously been defined entirely by missing data. Then came the most unsettling disconnection of all. As crime scene technicians carefully secured the perimeter, they discovered something far more alarming than a forced entry. On the back porch, illuminated by the harsh daylight, was a distinct biological trace. It was a clear and undeniable smear of blood staining the concrete surface. The discovery immediately shifted the nature of the inquiry from a simple missing persons check to a critical forensic investigation. The area was swiftly cordoned off as evidence collection teams moved in with their specialized equipment to document and preserve the scene. The biological material was carefully swabbed, cataloged, and rushed to the laboratory for urgent rapid testing. The results from the forensic analysis confirmed the absolute worst fears of the investigators and the family. The DNA extracted from the trace evidence on the porch was a definitive and direct match to Nancy Guthrie. This clinical confirmation anchored the abstract digital mystery to a highly disturbing physical reality. A violent physical interaction had undoubtedly occurred right on the threshold of her supposed sanctuary. An application designed to monitor a life-saving pacemaker suddenly lost its signal. It was completely severed from the network. The presence of her biological material on the exterior pavement indicated that she had been moved or forced outside the protective walls of her home. Yet the sheer mechanics of the scene presented a baffling set of contradictions that defied immediate logical explanation. If a violent struggle had taken place on the porch, why was the interior of the house largely undisturbed? There were no overturned furniture pieces or shattered lamps to suggest a chaotic fight for survival inside the living room. The sheer absence of defensive wounds or secondary traces within the house further complicates the narrative of that morning. Investigators had to painstakingly document every millimeter of the door frame, searching for microscopic fibers or tool marks that could explain the initial point of entry. The hinges and the locking mechanism were analyzed to determine if the breach was accomplished through brute force or sophisticated picking techniques. Every physical detail meticulously recorded at the back of the house stood in stark contrast to the vast empty void of the digital logs. The physical evidence pointed toward a rapid and decisive physical extraction rather than a prolonged domestic struggle. The perpetrator managed to breach the perimeter, confront the victim, and remove her from the premises while leaving a relatively minimal physical footprint. How does an 84-year-old woman vanish from a securely locked home without? This requires a level of physical control and situational awareness that is rarely seen in spontaneous home invasions. The smear on the concrete was the only loud physical evidence left behind in a crime scene defined by its eerie silence. It was a stark visual reminder of the vulnerability that exists even behind locked doors and electronic shields. The forensic trace on the porch clearly indicates a sudden and potentially violent physical struggle took place right at the edge of safety. But the absolute silence of the disabled electronic alarm systems points directly toward a deeply calculated and ice-cold operation. Someone knew exactly which digital threads to cut before crossing the physical threshold into her world. The meticulous search for answers eventually led investigators to scour the neighborhood for any external surveillance footage that might have survived the digital blackout. It was an arduous process of collecting and synchronizing fragmented video files from surrounding properties and distant traffic cameras. After hours of reviewing grainy images and static frames, the investigative team finally found the visual anomaly they desperately needed. Caught in the very edge of a peripheral security camera was the distinct figure of a suspect moving through the darkness.